Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday, September 4th, and welcome to today's Hands-On Live Lab. My name is Brandon Swagman, the host for today. So today's session, we are going to cover a lot of CCNA, Cisco CCNP certification content, specifically at the OSI Layer 2 on down configuration. So as always, any chat questions you may have, please post them in the WebEx chat. Our goal for today's session is to explore technologies and learn together. So with that, I'll introduce my guest today, Francisco Alvarez, who's joining us. So first of all, congratulations. Welcome to the Two-Timer Club for the Hands-On Live Lab series. You could catch Francisco's previous episode on OSPF in recordings, and I'll post that in chat. So welcome. Do you mind introducing yourself, Francisco?
Thank you, Brandon. Very happy to be back here and having the opportunity to share the content that I've been creating lately with our audience today. I also want to start by thanking you all for taking the time to be here today. I know we are all very busy with work, life in general. So for you to take an hour to be here in this webinar is very important to me. I want to share content related to Cisco Layer 2 networking today, and I want to make sure that you get the most out of these labs through the event today. A little bit about me. I have been with Worldwide for 4 years and a principal solutions architect, but I do have about 20 years worth of experience working with networks. In that time, I had the opportunity to work for many great enterprises in the St. Louis, Missouri area where I'm based. Companies like MasterCard. I worked for a service provider called Savvis Communication that became CenturyLink, or was acquired by CenturyLink. I also spent 6 years working for another enterprise called Enterprise Holdings. You might be familiar with some of the rental car companies under that umbrella, Enterprise, Alamo, and National. And during that 20 years of experience, I have all kinds of roles. Very early on in my career, I did a lot of operations, network operations, command center kind of roles. Halfway through the middle, working for the service provider, I got to do a lot of changes. It's a very fast pace, so very different than working for an enterprise. You do tens of changes every day during working hours and a lot of troubleshooting. And then I will say the last 10 years of my career, I've been focusing on architecture, designing and overseeing implementation of different architectures.
So today's conversation is a lot of the content is going to help reflect in your Cisco certifications, either CCNA or CCNP. So ask, what is your personal experience with the Cisco certifications?
Well, I started, my first certification that I got was actually a Microsoft server. This was probably 2004, 2005, and that was my first job. Something that I didn't like about working just with the server, it was when traffic left my device, it went somewhere, I didn't know where, and it was a cloud. But if I had a capture and I could prove that traffic was leaving and not returning, it's not my problem. If traffic is not getting to me, it's not my problem. It's very similar analogy to those working with firewalls. Like, is the traffic making it to my device and is it leaving? So in probably early 2005, I took a CCNA course, and that to me was where everything clicked for me. I fell in love with networking. I fell in love with routing protocols. A lot of CLI work, they're starting to go away nowadays with some of the tools that are becoming available. But I got my CCNA while I was working at MasterCard. Got my CCNP early on working for the service provider. I got my CCIE in routing and switching on, it was 2014. So it's been a little bit over 10 years ago. So I have walked the path of the full length of Cisco certifications.
What is your one lesson learned? So if you're exploring certifications and you had to pass down one piece of advice to someone that's starting to walk down this path, what would it be?
I will say to take it slowly. I remember, and maybe it's different for other people. For me, my experience, when I discovered CCNA and that level of content, my mind was already in CCIE. And 2005 to 2014, about 9 years. To me, a mistake that I see sometimes is people wanting to get to a higher level certification. Yet it's a great challenge, but you need to build experience along the way. So if you get your CCNA, find an entry-level job, get some experience doing changes. Most importantly, build very good habits, especially during maintenance. Do you have your pre-checks? You compare to your post-checks. If you cause any sort of issue or outage, is something that you want to be able to determine on your own instead of getting the phone call 15 minutes later. Things like that. And as you move through your career, the knowledge that you are learning, hopefully you find a place where you can implement it and reinforce it instead than trying to jump too far ahead in terms of learning.
That's great advice, to take your time and break it apart into manageable chunks, because that is a long journey through the certification process. And I think you mentioned on something, the experience. I can talk to myself is I am not a person that just can read the book and understand a topic. Mm-hmm. Hands-on experience, getting in there with a lab or getting some sort of experience, that at least in some way makes it stick in my brain. So with that, let's kind of open up what we have today. There's a lot of content today. When you talk about the OSI layer model 2 and everything that goes along with switching, there's a lot of content to go through. So we would be here for way more than an hour to cover everything layer 2. We'll talk about it a little bit. Do you mind kind of sharing, how is this content backed up? I guess, how do people get to the content? How do people get to the learning series? And what are some ways you've packaged this up to make it consumable to everybody out there?
All right. So let me start by the reason that I created this content. I have specialized all my career on connectivity, building backbones, getting traffic from point A to B. At some point, started building connectivity to the clouds, between the clouds, back to the data center. I will say in the last 5 years, I've been focusing a lot in Cisco SD-WAN, but I also specialize in many other areas that provide connectivity, carrier-neutral facilities like Equinix, so anything that is pretty much moving packets from A to B. As I have a lot of content in the platform that highlights that. And if I can show my screen, in terms of labs, you will see that a lot of my labs are Cisco SD-WAN based. There is a lot of newer labs for Cisco networking like OSPF and the ones that we are sharing today. But as I do a lot of work with either connecting to the cloud or working with SD-WAN, and people are consuming this learning path, some of the feedback that I have got is, this is great, but maybe my engineers need a primer on routing protocols, so BGP or layer 2. So about a year ago, we started building this learning path focusing on, as you say, Cisco CCNA, CCNP, Cisco focus mostly from the CLI, just to help individuals get up to speed with those protocols if needed. So to your second question, how do you access this content? For everybody that is in the event today, if you go to your event tab, and that's also under events, but you should get something that looks very close to what I have in the screen. Please click on that Cisco Networking Layer 2 technologies. And this is going to look a little bit different for you than for me, because I have already completed my own learning path. It's something that I do for quality control, just to make sure that the videos are displaying properly, articles and whatnot. On the top right, you probably have a Start Learning button. And once you click for that, you will be enrolled in the learning path.
Yeah, and let's kind of break this scene up here. So what we do is the way we put content together, at the highest level, we have what's called a learning series, and that's what you'll see represented here. Mm-hmm. Each one of the red or pink or orange, whatever that's coming across as, that colorful icon, that is a potential learning path. And inside that learning path has both articles, videos, and hands-on experience. So do you mind kind of walking us through these individual learning paths?
Sure. Something that I want to point out, as you probably saw in the screen when I came into this area, once you complete the learning path, you get a badge, which you can put in your social media, or you can download a printable certificate where it has your name and that you have completed the learning path. In terms of the content here, When I started thinking about creating a path focusing on Cisco Layer 2, I was trying to decide the curriculum. And then I realized, well, why don't I just use the current CCIE routing and switching, which now is called Enterprise Infrastructure Blueprint. So all these 3 learning paths pretty much get you very close to the full CCIE routing and switching for that Layer 2 section. I divided the content into 3 learning paths of 3 modules. The first one that focuses on the fundamentals, things that they are very basics, but if they are well understood early enough, it will go a long way. Things like MAC addresses. How does a MAC address table looks like? How does a switch operate? What's the function of a switch? How do you segment your network with VLANs? How do you add those into trunks so you can communicate across switches? Things like that. Basic foundational content is in that first learning path. Second learning path focuses on EtherChannels, and the last one focuses on the different flavors of spanning tree. And in a minute, we'll go deeper into the lab and you will be able to see the full curriculum for those.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a timeout question here and ask the audience, are you currently on your own certification journey? If you are, I'd love to hear some examples on how you could potentially use the labs today. And I'm going to ask you here in a second, Francisco, I know there's lab guides to go with the labs on how we recommend using the lab. Mm-hmm. What are some of the undocumented methods in which you could potentially use that? We'll cover that in a second. But in the WebEx chat, if you wouldn't mind, how are you going down a Cisco certification journey? What does your certification journey look like? Are you struggling or having challenges today? So with that, dive in.
All right. So let me, once you are in the learning path, if you open any of them, you will see that they are structured in a way where there might be different sections. Those sections are mostly comprised of articles and videos touching on a topic. And for this specific learning path, if you scroll to the bottom of the learning path, you will find a hands-on lab. That hands-on lab will walk you through different tasks for you to complete. At the very bottom of the learning path, there is a little quiz. It's about 10 questions about the topics that you have learned, and if you pass, it's marked completed. So if we go into one of the learning paths, for example, the trunks, VLANs, CDP, LLDP is a very long name. And by the way, all these labs, if you click on any of the labs through the event, those labs will be ready for you on launch. So that is there for you. So if you want to double click, I'll do that.
You make a really good point. Please launch the labs. Yeah. Play along with us. Walk through the command line as we do. And if you have questions, as you walk through the command line, that's what we'd love to hear in chat.
So just to provide a quick overview of how the lab is built. The topology is a small topology, but it's sufficient to be able to provide a lot of value. Yeah, it's a multi-home, small data center per se. There's perhaps a campus, 2 routers, 4 switches, kind of doing a core distribution kind of setup with a couple of hosts that you can use for let me refresh, that you can use to validate connectivity. In terms of accessing the devices, there is an M-Party tool at the very bottom. And from here, you can just double click a device and you're right at the CLI.
Yeah, so a couple house setting rules. So this is an example of one of the labs that are inside of the learning path. And this is the experience you typically would see. On the left-hand side, you have the lab guide. This lab guide is going to give you all the information you need. Here's the IP addresses, the usernames, the passwords, the interface numbers. It will also walk through step-by-step instructions on how to implement some of this stuff and go about from a reference. On the right side is a jump box. Everybody's in IT. This is a jump box. You get into your own dedicated environment. As Francisco mentioned, everybody will have access through the event today. I think the duration is roughly 24 hours. I'd have to check on how long you'll have this lab to walk through, but you can check it out again or renew again. And this is where you're going to get that hands-on experience. The thing I would offer you, if you have the luxury of 2 monitors, Francisco and I are today using laptops. So today I have the lab guide and the jump box on the same screen. Hidden in plain sight at the very bottom, I say it that way because I always miss it, is a little square that has an arrow exploding out of it. That is going to open up the lab guide in a separate window, so you can, in a dual monitor world or situation, have your lab guide on one screen and the jump box interfacing with the lab on another screen, just from a comfortability standpoint.
Yeah. Likewise, the workstation, that is the same icon. You can, if you want to just keep one on the portal and the other one standing by itself, you can use it to do that. In terms of the lab guide, let me show you this. It's actually pretty good. For the lab guide, there is a little bit of on how to use the lab, but in terms of the content that I cover, and you can probably see here a little bit better, there is a series of tasks that you have to complete. So the way that I wrote those tasks is very similar to the format that you might find in the CCIE lab exams. And if I scroll down to task 1, you can see, let me open this a little bit more, you can see a little bit nicer, is configure something, and you know it gives you a few steps to complete. I challenge you to try to do that on your own and trying to solve it. The configuration, here, let me refresh this. The configuration to complete the task is provided to you. The configuration can be copied and pasted in the device, but I challenge you to type yourself those configurations, start building that muscle memory, and not only for the configuration, but as well for the show commands.
So question, I see 14 different tasks.
Yep.
I want to start at task 7. Can I do that, or is it recommended to start with task 1? Can I choose my own adventure? What does this look like from a consumption standpoint?
It depends on the lab. And for this one specifically, and I think most of the layer 2, they are written in a sequential mode, especially this first one where you start building some trunks, you start adding VLANs, then you continue to creating some SVIs and some layer 3, converting some switch ports to layer 3, things like that. This lab is written to be consumed sequentially. Something that you asked before is like, what is the unapproved usage of this lab? Well, the topology is there, right? You can choose your own adventure if you want. If you're trying to, if you're trying to get familiar with HSRP, you have the perfect topology to do it. If you want to turn up routing protocols, you want to do, this topology can go very far. In fact, this is the same topology that I use on my Cisco Catalyst Center lab, where I built a whole SDA fabric with ISIS and OSPF, and you can do a lot with it.
Great. So as you walk through the lab, before we keep walking through the lab and getting into the command line, that's where we're going to get our experience with some of this. How does each one of these tasks you have outlined in the lab guide relate back to those articles or videos?
Well, everything is covered in the videos. The way that I like to use the articles for this area is for the more kind of like a technical deep dive. If you're trying to learn how does a frame looks and the different fields in the frame and things like that, I try to use the article for things like that, where you can take your time and consume it. And then on the videos is a little trim back, is more real life. It's like, do I really need to know what the frame looks like? You probably don't, unless you're troubleshooting something with Wireshark, something like that. But if you're trying to configure something from the CLI, then troubleshoot it from the CLI. That's the kind of experience that I try to provide.
Walk us through that. So we just configured a trunk, maybe by accident, by copy and paste magic here, we configured a trunk. Let's say I need to know more. I want to learn about trunks. Because there's probably some multiple choice certification question that's coming up. What does the lab guide, can we dive into the trunk article or video? What does that start to look like?
We can. So if you take the lab guide, I try to cover, as I say, I align it with the CCIE blueprint. There are a lot of content here. Something that I try to provide, besides just giving you a task and how to solve it, is trying to give you in-depth. I can show you here. I think I can show you the articles and the other stuff. There we go. So once you configure the task, I walk you through what is that we're doing, the reason that we're doing. Something that I try to provide you is what are the best practices. That's something that sometimes get missed in the labs. Like here, build something 7 different ways, but why would you use one over the other? And something else that I try to provide is a little bit of my own personal experience, issues that I have seen to misconfigurations, just things to avoid, and provide value like that. In terms of the articles, for example, if we take the VLANs and trunk learning path, there is an article for understanding layer 2 network technologies and how they interact together. What are, from the very basic MAC addresses to what are the need for VLANs, what is the need for trunks, what is the issue that creates that where you might need to implement spanning tree protocol, how to link, or how to aggregate different links into port channels, things like that, just to give you a good primer. We go a little bit deeper in some of the articles, but as I say, on the video, it's more of the hands-on and a little bit of the things to look for and how to implement things in a safe and secure way.
I like it. Learning by repetition. So that's something as we go through the learning paths, I recommend you is take a look in the article and video. You may pick and choose which one you like to use based on your style of learn, but they're there to enforce repetition and learning by repetition.
Yeah, something that I will point out is something that I mentioned earlier, focusing on the basics. And sometimes the basics, they sound so foundational that you just read over them and you just do a lab and you're like, I get it, I don't need to spend more time. But truly understanding how a network works, even if you take it to the very basic, what does a switch do? What does a router do? How does a switch make switching decision? How does a router make routing decision? Those will go a very, very long way through your CCNA, CCNP, CCIE studies. That's something that I try to build into the learning path. You will see a lot of repetitions, and so we're going to build a trunk this way. We're going to build a trunk using dynamic trunking protocol in one way, in another way. But as I said, I always try to provide you from all the options. This is why you will use this versus this. And there are some options that I cover more for historical value than anything else, and those are call out that like this is the way it used to be before new versions or new protocols came along, and this is why you don't use those anymore.
Oh. So I'm going to let you take a second and go ahead and configure the other side of that trunk.
It's done.
And sort of bring it up. Oh, it's done? Okay, prepared ahead of time. I do have a question for the audience. So as we walk through this learning path, one thing we ask is we would love some inspiration. Is where should we take this learning path, learning series lab? What are some things you would like to see us build in the future in the name of training, in the name of education and learning together? So please post any suggestion or ideas on what we could do in the future in chat. I would greatly appreciate that. So with that, let's test the other side of that trunk. Is it up?
Sure. So the trunk is actually I configured the second switch. Just let me scroll. Sorry, every time that I go back, this screen is freezing me. So just to keep it very simple, it's just a connection between switch 1 and switch 2. Switch 2 was configured ahead of time. If we look at the configuration, just for a little reminder, because I copy and paste, it's just in the switch port is configured in a trunk mode and is not using any negotiation. It's just a static trunk. A very useful command to validate switch port is looking at the interface with the switch port command at the end. And here you can see the administrative mode, that's the way that you configure it, and the operational mode, which is sometimes when you're working with dynamic trunking protocols, there could be different outcomes based on the configuration that you have. So that is a very helpful command. If we go through some of the content in here, as I say, we cover dynamic trunking protocols. We do VLANs, and let me just do 3 different VLANs. We go through assigning those VLANs to the trunk, as you can see over here. Where is it? Yeah. Trunking is enabled for all VLANs. Best practices is that you allow trunking only for the VLANs that you need to provide connectivity. So if we go to the trunk, switchboard trunk, allow the VLAN 10, 20, and if I can type 30. So now if we go back to our switchboard command, we can see that the only VLANs that they are allowed is 10, 20, and 30. Something else that I try to provide is I have seen many outages in those 20 years, and a lot of them I have seen them almost everywhere that I work or with other companies that I have networking relationship. An outage, the number one outage that you can do with layer 2 is the following one. You get a request to add a new VLAN to the trunk. Let's call this VLAN, let's give it a number, 66. And it's midnight, after hours, you're doing your network change, you're already gone through a whole day of work, taking the kids to soccer, cooking dinner, your brain is a little fried by then, and you go to add the VLAN switchboard trunk, allowed VLAN, and then 66. There is a syntax to add new VLANs to the trunk. If you omit the add, and I have seen this, as I say, countless base, what you actually end up doing is you configure VLAN 66, but you just deleted all of the other VLANs.
So, funny story.
Have you seen it?
I did this many moons ago, implementing a change during a corporate update, trying to pay attention to the corporate webcast. I was implementing a change, creating a new VLAN. I did this. I got to run into the data center with a console cable during the middle of the corporate update. I was that guy. So I know exactly this felt. I felt this pain.
I have seen this outage. I would say in regards of layer 2 is the number one outage that I have seen countless times. They used to be not used that much anymore. VTP, VLAN trunking protocol, which the whole point of VTP was to advertise VLANs across your switches instead of having to manually configure in all of them. So this kind of human error paired with VTP, that is a very bad night. And so hopefully if you take something from this webinar today is always be careful when you're adding VLANs to trunks and try to avoid this outage.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So I assume this is something you would cover in the lab guide as best practices.
I cover it in the lab guide. I also, as I say, I cover gotchas and pretty much what I just said, I cover in the lab guide. Like I have seen this outage over and over and over again. I'm curious, did we get any responses about the certifications that people are pursuing?
No responses yet. So again, if you are pursuing a certification, I'd love to learn about it and love to learn some ways we could potentially help with content that would inspire Francisco's future direction on how to make some of this content going down a path. I do have one personal question though. So we've talked a lot about, and we've seen Cisco command line. How would this transfer to non-Cisco devices, the Aruba devices, the Juniper devices of the world, the Arista devices, or maybe even the Nexus, Cisco Nexus devices? How does this information here translate to non-Cisco stuff?
Most of the topics that are covered in this learning path and within the learning series are protocols, not all of them, but the vast majority are protocols that they are open source, implemented across different vendors. So if you are working with Juniper or with other vendor, the technology is the same, right? You're still building VLANs, you're still adding a trunk, you're adding those VLANs to the trunks, building port channels. The syntax will change. But if, for example, for port channels, if you're using LACP to bundle a couple of links into a logical group, a port channel or EtherChannel, the high-level logic is there. The options that where you can add minimum number of links or maximum number of links, things like that is is part of the technology. So the only thing that you have to figure it out is the syntax that you need to be able to implement it.
Perfect. So I did have a couple chats in, so I'm going to put you in the hot seat with some live questions that come in. So we have one individual who's comparing for a CCNP DC core for ACI. So you mentioned it earlier with Catalyst Center. So I kind of wanted to drill in. So there was a large movement around software-defined networking, and we were going to have controllers that were going to push configurations down, and it was all templatized and nobody needed to learn anything. How do traditional OSI layer 2 skills work in a software-defined world like Catalyst Center, SD-WAN, or even ACI?
That is a very good question. So to me, tools like Catalyst Center that you might use at the campus or Nexus Dashboard, even ACI, they abstract a level of configuration, which is it is great. Something that I see that it brings a lot of value is making sure that your configuration is standardized, making sure that you're building very complex deployments. For example, if you build like a VXLAN fabric using Catalyst Center, you are building those up to Cisco best practices versus an engineer looking through documentation and trying to figure it out how to build it best and testing it and whatnot. So it brings an enormous amount of value. However, once you remove that automation and that portal, the configuration in the devices and the technology is the same. In fact, there's many times when I'm testing new versions of Catalyst Center that I enable a feature and then I go to the CLI and it's like, that's how you did it. And sometimes I even revert engineer, like this is how you build a fabric according to best practices to Cisco and compare it with the documentation and things like that. So even though you're abstracting a huge level of not having to go into the CLI and write mem and all that, the technology is still there. Layer 2 is still layer 2. ARP is still there. MACs are there. Trunks, VLANs, all that. Port channels, spanning tree is all in there. To me, personally, I like the journey that I took from before those products through the CLI because I feel you get a more intimate knowledge of the technology, especially if you go very deep and you start enabling debugs, and you, especially in a lab environment like this, don't do debugs in production, please, without Cisco supervision. But in an environment like this, where you can just debug and you can see the ARP requests going and coming and seeing what's happening with the routing tables or with the protocols, or is a very valuable learning tool.
Okay. Another question here. So still in the hot seat. I'm going to bring these questions live here. So another individual's been studying for CCNA, but was considering CompTIA A+. So how would content in this learning plan, or does it, I guess is the good question, does it relate back to CompTIA+, or is there a relationship between the CCNA and CompTIA?
Yeah. So at some point, many years ago, I did get my A+ and my Network Plus. That was very, very early on as well. If I could recall correctly, A+ focused more on like a PC type of hardware, where Network Plus provided a little bit of the network fundamentals. It teaches you a lot of the fundamentals of switching and routing. It doesn't show you command line or how to build it, but it does give you that foundation. It also teaches you something very valuable that you will use for the rest of your career, which is subnetting. So there is a lot of value there. I see Network Plus as a primer to a Cisco CCNA. I don't see it as a requirement. You can start with Cisco CCNA, and it covers a lot of the topics as well. Maybe it doesn't go as deep in some areas because they have it defined between CCNA, CCNP, and CCIE. And where you look at the content from CCNA to CCNP plus, I will say, it's the same content. The only difference is you keep going deeper in the layers. And hopefully, as I say earlier, you're getting some experience to go along. So the topics that you're learning, you're getting to use, and it's easier to connect the dots than, trying to learn a protocol and without any working experience. I remember those days. It's very challenging to remember. Like, I think I'm doing this right, but as I said, the hands-on experience is very valuable as well.
That's perfect. So another individual in the tent is looking to just basically renew their CCNA. So this content here is a lab. So I don't know how you're achieving lab on scenarios. Please take and consume the learning path, the lab. I am going to pose another question to the audience is, as you guys are on, or as everybody's on these certification journeys, what challenges are you running into? And I'm asking that question in a way that hopefully it creates some inspiration for Francisco here on future content. I do, and I appreciate this because you mentioned your experiences. I was a Microsoft administrator, and I knew that the packet left the server, but how it got to the other thing is another individual relates very similar. Yep. I'm trying to connect the dots in this scenario. Welcome to your future network career as you're going to diving deeply into layer 2 and probably eventually into layer 3 routing and from there. So, sorry, I'm going to let the chat go a little bit more. How about the lab?
Yeah, on that last comment, so if you are preparing, if you have to renew your CCNA, that's something that you can do. Or technically, if you pass any of the CCNP exams, I believe it renews the CCNA as well. If you decide to go for the switching exam, this learning path, all three together, as I say, it gets you very, very close to what I call CCNP plus. It might not be sufficient. I don't go as deep in the layers to like a CCI level with debugs and things like that. But for CCNA or any of the CCNP classes, I got you covered. For CCNA, you might have to trim back as needed. Just look at the curriculum that you're trying to learn, and I'm positive that most of the content should be covered here. So let me show you a little bit on the other two labs. So we touch on this foundational one that focuses on the VLAN strengths, and as well a couple of very valuable protocols, mostly for device discovery, so CDP, things like that you will use a lot. So I got you covered there. Second learning path, I focus on EtherChannels. Focus on, as I said, there might be some tasks over here, like task number 1, which is creating a static port channel that might be there for more of a, I will call it historical value, like this is how it used to be, and this is the challenges with this. And then starting with task number 2, we're gonna start using LACP, which is an open vendor. I don't cover, there used to be a long time ago, Cisco proprietary PAGP, PAGP. I don't cover that anymore as I didn't see it listed in the current blueprint. So I think Cisco is moving away from that and just embracing LACP like the rest of other vendors for inter-vendor operability. So over here, I walk you through everything that you need for port channels. From layer 2 port channels to layer 3, different features, adding requirements like a minimum number of links, maximum number of links, as well as few other very helpful and valuable features that you might be needed at some point when you're trying to come up with your own designs. And finally, there is a third learning path that focuses on spanning tree protocol, which is used to prevent loops in a layer 2 network. Gonna go through all three. Per VLAN spanning tree, this is an older version, rarely used today, but there is still a lot of basics in this part of the lab that teach you how to set up root priority, what are the issues that you're trying to solve, that maybe in the later parts of the protocol, like rapid spanning tree, which is the default nowadays, they're covered, but you still get the basics and you still get to define, root bridges, things like that. And then I end up the learning path with MSTP, or multiple spanning tree protocol, which is another flavor. And so as I say, it gets you very close to CCIE in terms of content.
So I have to admit, I watched you configure a VLAN. I watched you configure trunks. I watched you allow a VLAN, and then you didn't enter the spanning tree command. I was kind of giddy, like we got to check for loops. This is nature. This is nature. So I like the way you built this out. This really helps kind of set that. How do I work through provisioning that VLAN? How do I make sure it's through my network? And number one, how do I not make sure it's loop? I also think things in here like VLAN interfaces, SVIs, is starting to walk into that routing, that layer 3 OSI model.
Yeah.
We do have one question. Do you review distribution, core, and access layer architectures, or maybe spine and leaf?
What's the question again? Do I review?
Do you review or touch on how, I'll call it the concepts of distribution, core, and access? I guess maybe pull up your diagram would be a good layer. Do you go into detail on why this is cabled the way it is as my distribution, my core, and access?
Yeah. So the reason I created this is to kind of duplicate what you could find in the real world. You have the 4 switches that they will do layer 2. However, the 2 switches in the middle, the distribution layer over here, that will also provide routing to the routers, and as you can see, is fully high available. Now, this architecture, it used to be a very valuable architecture many years ago. It still is, but you can see, as you pointed out, spine and leaves kind of architectures that have higher scalability, where all the switches are connected to all the leaves, and kind of like the switches behave a little bit as a route reflector for BGP in a sense.
So when I hear spine and leaf, I almost automatically, and I think this is like a 98% of the time, think software defined. And you're probably going to have a controller, a spine leaf, and a non-SDN environment. It's a lot of configuration. So would you do me a favor, and I know this is a little bit out of order of your tabs, but you go back to your profile tab there. So in today's invite, you'll see Francisco's face as a speaker today. If you select him and go to contribution here, this will be all the different pieces of content that Francisco has added, both inside and outside of this content we're talking about today. So you will see Catalyst Center, formerly known as DNA Center. You will see Viptela, now known as Catalyst SD-WAN. You can also do a little bit of searching, in which you will find the ACI of the world, the software defined, and get a little bit more into the spine leaf. I do have a kind of a follow-up question to the panelists that asked that is, we've been talking a lot about, should we build training material for command line non-SDN spine and leaf data center? So if you're looking for that sort of content, I'd love to hear details. If you're building a command line spine leaf data center fabric, is it VXLAN? Is it using BGP? Is it using OSPF? What is the makeup of that? Because that's something we've talked about, building that sort of training material for a long time, but there's been so many variables. It's just, where do we start and what variables make sense? So again, audience question, please help us inspire what additional content we can make in the future. So
yeah, something else, and somebody touched on, so this is the overview of the Cisco Catalyst Center. I don't want to get us too far into a rabbit hole, but going to labs and learning, and under the library, you can find an enormous amount of learning path and labs. Somebody mentioned ACI. There is a colleague of mine, Mike Whitty, that has an enormous amount of Cisco ACI content from foundational, how to turn up the controllers, to how to build tenants, and it takes you from the beginning to a very advanced topics, as well as multi-site. So if you're looking at expanding on ACI, please check out his content, because it's great.
Okay, so a little bit more following up with chat. You can do the same search Francisco did. There is a little bit of Arista content in here in reference to the data center side of networking. Also, I hear the first request, please, an ACI Nexus lab and learning event. So we have some requests for an ACI lab and learning event. We will take that back and see if we can bring people on for that. Question, I'm curious, as this come up, is Nexus Dashboard Fabric Controller. That's another SDN controller Cisco offers. Is there interest in that sort of content to be produced as well? So with that, I'm going to let you dive into the lab for a couple more minutes here from the end and before we wrap.
Yeah, actually, since it seems like more people seems to be between the CCNA and CCNP, let me show you some of the CCNA, CCNP kind of related content that we have in the platform. Actually, let me see if I can.
Do me a favor, search for the learning series called Network Engineering.
Yeah.
So what we've bundled up here in the way of content is we're trying to put things together. Earlier I mentioned that a learning series is the biggest container of content. From there dives into learning paths. So all of the layer 2 learning paths, the orange pinkish icons that Francisco's kind of walked through today, are put inside of this network engineering foundations learning path, along with OSPF, along with BGP, and we have inspiration to one day add ERGP content. So I guess I can take this link, and if you're looking for the grand all, a little bit beyond what today's conversation was, this would be the learning series to check out and enroll.
Yep. And let me show you one more. Gonna have to search for it. I did create, actually it's a learning series now. A learning series focus on OSPF. I go very deep into OSPF. There is a foundational learning path and there is an intermediate. The foundational focuses a lot in the basics, how to build neighbors, hello timers, things like that. The intermediate, that one I love. It touches on traffic engineering, modifying costs, creating summary routes, filtering virtual links, the different default routes that you can generate in OSPF, as well as the different area types that you can have. Think of like stop areas, NSS8, all that is covering the very similar format that we have for the layer 2 path, where you go through all the tasks and you get to experience. That lab is actually, you can cherry pick I think there's like 20 something tasks, and with exception of 2, you can just practice whatever is that you want to practice with. You don't have to like sequentially follow like we do for layer 2. Yeah, let's see what else can we cover.
Okay, so number 1, big fan of ERGP. Mm-hmm. We hear some thumbs up and seconding of the ERGP training as we can build that in. Also something, honestly, thank you, Walt, something we have not thought about is DMVPN, next hop routing protocol, and that sort of setup as well. So we can definitely take that sort of feedback back to our creators and see if that's the kind of content we can build to provide some hands-on and some training material. So with that, I'm going to give a few more minutes here for everybody to enter any inspirational, what is some content you would like to see that would help out in your world? So I appreciate everything that's been there. And to chat. With that, if you're going to give one piece of parting advice for anybody that's launching the Layer 2 learning series, it's roughly 6-8 hours worth of content. If you go through every article, every video, keep in mind there's some redundant pieces in there for repetition.
Yep.
What is your one piece of advice to give to them? I liked your advice earlier of take your time through the entire certification lifecycle. What is it, your piece of advice when it comes to this learning series?
It's funny because actually I was going to say that. Take your time. But besides that, just to make it very repetitive, focus on the basics. So I've been doing networks 20 years. Out of those 20 years, I have been interviewing individuals at least for 15 for different roles, from very junior to very senior roles. Some questions that I normally ask, and you will be surprised that the very senior engineers choke with these kind of questions. Can you explain to me how does a switch function? What's the role of a switch? If they pass that one, the second one is, can you explain to me how does a router work? How does a router make decisions when your traffic arrives to the router? What's the logic? And the answer is very simple. Longest prefix, best admin distance, or protocol cost, just based on which one you might be hitting. If you learn the basics, those will go an enormous amount of way. Understanding ARP is a very simple protocol. It doesn't take much to understand. But if you couple ARP with how does a switch work, and you're able to trace that traffic or that path across a layer 2 network, that will be very helpful to you. You will not believe how many people have come for help. Like, how do I do this? Very senior engineers that they still lack the basics, even though they were able to build very complex environments. So again, my recommendation to you, take your time, focus on the basics, and don't try to rush it. And as I say earlier, if you can find a way to apply some of these commands and technologies in your day-to-day work, that is the key to continue reinforcing the knowledge, so you don't have to continuously relearn it.
Thank you. So number one, thank you for coming today. Thank you for spending time talking about this content. We greatly appreciate this contribution to WWT.com. Everybody on the WebEx today, thank you for your time and attending. Please enjoy the lab and learning path. Provide any feedback through the email surveys that come. You will have access to this learning path through the event for roughly 30 days. The event is going to be recorded, so our conversation will live for eternity on the internet worlds, both WWT.com and YouTube. So if you'd like to go back and review the conversation today, it will be posted to both media channels. Next up is you will receive an email for today's event. Please give us your feedback. What did you think of our conversation today? And what did you think of the content today? What are some things you would like to see? Please take some time and fill out the survey. I would greatly appreciate it. Our next hands-on live session will be coming up on September 18th. I will have Chance Cornell with me, and Chance will be bringing another lab in which he's created. And he's titled it Crafting Your First AI Agent. I will be the first one to say I have not taken Chance's lab yet, but plan to do over the next 2 weeks before this event. If you're interested, Crafting Your First AI Agent email invite will be going out soon. You can also search on WWT.com to find that event and enroll, similar to what you did with this one. With that, I greatly appreciate everybody's time and attendance today. Have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you.